Hi everyone. So I know the last video was extensive, 40 minutes. I think it might be a record for me actually, so I'll try not to make videos so long, but I do think it was important to talk about all those issues. Um, I came across a report in the Metro about the Police Federation. If we could just find the quotation, if you just bear with me a second. Um, yeah, so this is from the Metro newspaper, February the 15th. A group representing 31,000 Met officers has declared it has no faith in London Mayor Sadiq Khan after his very public ousting of Dame Cressida Dick. Met Police Federation Chair Ken Marsh said recent scandals were sickening, but politicians use the commissioner to deflect from their own failings. Now, this is not a new sort of dynamic, tensions between a police force and a mayor. It's happened in the United States between Bill de Blasio and NYPD police union there. I forget what the formal name is. Um, when there was all the issues going on in New York City with Black Lives Matter and so on, um, de Blasio took quite a hardline approach, calling out police brutality. And there was one incident where a lot of officers turned their back on the mayor, um, former mayor de Blasio, I should say. The current mayor, Eric Adams, is actually a former police officer and he's the second African American be mayor of New York City, so it'll be interesting to see what his sort of response will be as a former police officer and as a black man, because that's an interesting position to be in. So anyway, the Police Federation, they have about 38,000 likes on their Facebook page. Um, they have a piece about this, talking about their disappointment at the resignation of Dame Cressida Dick and criticising Cam for his position on that. Well, a police federation, obviously, it's their job to look out for the interests of police officers. But I would question to what extent they're simply looking out for police officers versus to what extent are they basically being apologists for the corrupt side of the Metropolitan Police. Um, Looking at their page, there wasn't a single public statement on any of the recent controversies, not one, not a single word of remorse or condemnation of corrupt officers. And, the police officers and family members and some people in that world will often say that politicians use them as a scapegoat. The same argument can be made that when they're criticised, they use the press and politicians as a scapegoat rather than taking responsibility. Now, if there's one thing that makes my blood boil, it's abuse of power. And being a police officer is a position of power. It varies, obviously, depending on the force, depending on the rank, and so on, but ultimately it is a position of power. Um, this is not to say that it's exactly the same situation as the United States. I don't think it is. I don't think British police are trigger happy, and I don't think it's quite the same dynamic. Nevertheless, in our urban centres, particularly London, of course, there's been a history of racial tensions. I'm not someone that blames all of that on the police. There's times I think that they've been in very dangerous situations and they've had to take action and they've been unfairly condemned for that. But I have a big problem with this conclusion that if you criticise the police, you're therefore anti-police. It's a little bit like people who criticise abuse of power by soldiers are accused of being anti-military. And I have to say, this is more a domain of the right. It tends to be right-leaning or conservative people who tend to have this knee-jerk reaction. If you call out someone in uniform, then you're somehow against the wider body, like you're anti-police or you're anti, in the case of soldiers abusing the power, anti-military. I take the view that responsibility is paramount. Officers who abuse their power are entirely responsible for their own actions. So that watchdog report that revealed that Metropolitan Police officers, serving Metropolitan Police officers, were joking about raping women at knife point, killing African children, and coming out with some disgusting racist views. Um, they're not fit to wear the uniform. They shouldn't be put on desk duty. They should be sacked immediately. Now, the Met has failed to do that. The Wayne Couzens case, or the Sarah Everard case to use his victim's name, happened on Cressida Dick's watch. A lot of things have happened on her watch, and frankly, I think it's overdue that she stepped down. I think the problem with any union is they will protect their own. But when it's a police union and they're directly involved with public safety and policing by consent, that obviously raises some problems. You know, I mean, do they understand the bad optics? Do they understand that this isn't just some press invention? The Metropolitan Police is rotten. I think they have a serious problem. That's not to say every office is corrupt. I'm sick and tired of people making excuses for police abusing the power. And, I'm someone who's been very critical of Black Lives Matter. I'm someone who's been very critical of those people who say defund the police. I think that's a mistake. That won't help anyone. Because you defund the police, all you're doing is taking resources away from victims, people that they are tasked with protecting. So that's a stupid idea. Um, but I do think that police officers, police chiefs need to start taking some damn responsibility and admitting that they've got a problem. I'm sick and tired of corrupt officers simply being put on desk duty. And I'm sick and tired of this mentality, this knee jerk mentality, that people who criticise the police are therefore anti police. Or a typical attitude will be, oh, well, you'll be the first to call them up if you're a victim of crime. Yeah. Why does that mean you can't? Why is it a contradiction or a hypocrisy to call up an emergency services but also have a problem with them abusing the power? I don't think that's a contradiction. I don't think it's like you trade one off for the other, and it's a stupid mentality. Like anyone who criticizes the police should never phone the police. They're a public service. They choose to sign up. They choose to protect the public. So do it. I mean, of course, there's many examples of police heroism and good things as well, and of course that should be recognised. I'm all for that. But just looking at that page, I suspect that a lot of the people who support that page will have personal connections. They'll either be police officers or they'll be related to police officers, wives, husbands, children. So it's understandable that they would want to protect the image of the police, but they have to accept that this isn't some sort of press witch hunt. These are things that have actually happened. There were two other officers that were joking about the two girls that got murdered. I mean, if this is a mentality of people who are meant to protect the public, that raises alarm bells because it shows a callous lack of empathy for victims of crime. If that doesn't concern you, you need to pay attention. Um, and this is an internal problem as well because there's been male officers joking about raping female colleagues. So I think the Met has a serious problem with misogyny. The fact that one of their officers killed a woman in brutal circumstances when they're the people tasked with protecting society. So, I'm not a big fan of Sadiq Khan. I disagree with him on a lot of political areas, but in the end of the day, he was elected by the people of London. And the job of any politician is to represent constituents. And if there's significant public anger about police corruption, about police abusing their power, and I would argue it's a responsibility of an elected politician to call that out. It's a responsibility. That's not scapegoating the police. That's doing their job. I mean, I've defended the police on occasion. There's times I think they do have their hands tied. For example, there was footage a couple of years ago. It was the Metropolitan Police. It was a teenage suspect, shoplifter, and they pursued him. And immediately, they got surrounded by a mob yelling racist at them. So situations like that, I've got sympathy for the police. I think they are in a very demanding and stressful job. The salary is pretty mediocre. It's not great. Probably morale is low, but the police need to stop making excuses for the bad apples in their midst. They need to stop saying that it's some sort of, the press just trying to give them a bad image or politicians trying to capitalize on it. They have to accept that they've got a problem. And I don't think they have fully done that. I don't think they've fully accepted that just one corrupt officer, you could have 10 good officers. One corrupt officer, say, joking about raping women, will do untold damage. So it's in their own interest to absolutely purge these people. I think putting them on death duty, I think someone who jokes about raping a colleague or raping anyone for that matter should not be wearing a uniform. Period. Because how is he going to show empathy to a woman who reports rape? The obvious follow up is he wouldn't, or his mindset will be in the wrong place. A racist officer, how are they meant to represent one of the world's most multicultural cities? If they were dealing with a victim of hate crime, for example. Um, so I'm a strong believer that police shouldn't be above the law. I'm a strong believer that corrupt officers should be hauled before the cold, hauled over the coals, so to speak. Of course, the evidence should be there. It shouldn't be a witch hunt. It shouldn't be trial by media. But if the evidence is clear, and that can be through whistleblowers, it can be through victim statements, um, independent complaints procedures. If the evidence is strong, I think such officers should not only be sacked from the force, if they've committed an offence, they should be arrested. I was watching Detroit the other night, the Catherine Bigelow drama set in the Detroit race riots. Now, we haven't had anything quite on that scale, um, but just reiterates how corrupt police can be. Um, and again, it's probably not helpful to make comparisons between different forces at different times, but the Met has a problem. And I don't think it's good enough to say, well, you can't say anything about this because they're the people that you would call if you were a victim of crime. Nah, that's basically it's kind of blackmail. It's like saying, well, you have to shut up as a concerned citizen, or you can't have opinions about police corruption because you might be a victim of crime one day and you might rely on them. To me, that sounds like an obnoxious trade-off. So summed up, I think the police federation, I get that their job is to look after the interests of their members. I get that. But they have to be a lot more honest as well and accept that some of the criticism is absolutely warranted. And instead of always getting defensive, they should publicly apologize and they should vow that they won't protect corrupt officers. So far, they've failed to do that. Saying that they're sickened by what's emerged isn't enough. They have to show that they're not going to be a barrier to those officers being held to account. And I think right now they are, because they have a vested interest in protecting them. I mean, fundamentally, you cannot have a situation in a democracy where one group of people are above the law. And I think too often police officers get away with too much. Yes, it's true that sometimes they have their hands tied. Yes, it's true that sometimes the criticism is very unfair. But ultimately, when they sign up, they know that they are in a position of power. So I don't have much sympathy for this idea. Well, people should respect my uniform. I could do what I like. Let me know your thoughts. It's one area I differ with the more right wing conservative side of things because I think they're too quick to defend abuse of power. And another point, I'm very conservative about issues of crime and justice. I've always said thugs who terrorize society have to face consequences. I've always considered myself conservative on crime. I don't think it's a contradiction to think that corrupt officers should be held to account. I don't think it's a contradiction to say that you believe in justice and you support the police and you are conservative on crime, but you also want to see corrupt officers held to account. Why is that a contradiction? Because I think an effective police force An efficient police force, a police force that should get respect from the public, is one that will, sort out its own mess. And I think the Met has failed to do that. It failed to do it on Cressida Dick's watch. She made statements of remorse and vows to clean up, but it didn't really materialize. Not sufficiently, anyway. So, yeah, I think it's right that she left. It'll be interesting to see what the wider public thinks of this because, the people on that page are going to be either police officers or have vested interests. But the wider public, I don't know. I think they'll be a bit probably mixed. I think a lot of people, though, would say that she should have resigned. I personally think so. Um, I mean, it's an enormously demanding position. I'm not downplaying that. Being Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, it always has been. Um, Going back to Charles Warren during the Jack the Ripper case, the heat that he faced was enormous. But for those who say that the press are just out for a witch hunt or, it's their anti-police, we live in a democracy. And part of a free press is holding power to account. So if you don't like it, then go and live in a totalitarian state. That's the bottom line.